Coming up on the live and interactive ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, Edgar and I will get you all of your latest news and information from the state capitol and CDE with an in-depth analysis on how it impacts you. Plus, today we are talking about the federal investigation into CDE and alleged violations with FERPA. We've got F3 on the show today to talk about what that could mean for your school district.
The Legislative Lunch Break starts now.
And it's a couple of minutes after 1 o'clock. We welcome you on a Wednesday to the live and interactive ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, along with Dr. Edgar Zazweta, ACSA's Executive Director. I'm Naj and Edgar, ACSA's Senior Director of Marketing Communications. Welcome. After taking last week's off at ACSA's Superintendent Symposium, so glad that you are with us today. Edgar, how are you?
Good. I mean, I want to stop short because my mind goes, oh, it feels good to be home. And, you know, we've been on the road and whatnot. But here's the thing. I mean, we were in Indian Wells. It was beautiful. We were with a bunch of our great members, our superintendents last week. I know we've had a couple stops here on the ACSA Road Tour here this month with various conferences. But it is good to be home. It is good to have a week here in Sacramento and get back into the normal grind. No shortage of issues before us. So, but to answer your question, I'm doing well today, Naj. And yourself? Good? Everything good?
Man, I'm here.
All right.
I'm here.
That's all we could ask.
That's all we could ask. Hey, I think it would be prudent for us to mention your daughter's 18th birthday, right? And how you maneuvered your way from, and you don't have to give that many details, but how you maneuvered your way from dad, you're not going to be here, to actually being there and then being back at Superintendent Symposium.
Yeah.
God bless Southwest Airlines, right?
I wouldn't recommend this tribal itinerary to many, but yeah, I will say, so my daughter turned 18, which makes me feel very old now, you know, that I have an 18-year-old, but she turned 18 on the first day of our symposium. And I saw this, I think we put our schedule like 2 years ahead of time. So I saw it in a trigger, but I couldn't do anything, right? We have a big role. I was giving the opening remarks. I was like, you know, she'd understand, and she would have understood. But as she told me, I had initially told her, look, make it up to you. But, you know, it's one thing when we're in Monterey, I could drive back and forth. It's, you know, it's not the easiest place to get back to Sacramento, but dad guilt got me. And I had you know, and thanks to our members and our leadership who gave me the grace, I did my responsibilities in the morning, rushed to the airport, jumped on a flight, had a connection in LA from Palm Springs, made it in time for dinner, and then came right back. And, you know, as to your point, Naj, she said she had told her friends, I was just talking bad about you, that you weren't going to be here on my 18th birthday. I figured, here's how I figured. This is probably the last birthday she's actually ever going to care about her dad being at her birthday, right? Yeah. She's probably not, you know, as having older kids, they probably don't want us around at 19. Definitely is not going to want me around on 21. So I made the trek and I made it back. So it was a good week.
Father of the year right there. Father of the year. What I've realized is with two girls in college, you are correct. The 18th is like the last one you get to celebrate in the house.
Yes.
And then you guarantee are going to be traveling for their birthday.
Yes.
So wherever you're sending your daughter to school, be prepared for that first time you're going to be traveling over. Want to say hello to Jason Angle. He was first on the chat today. Christopher Riley, Neri is with us, Helio Brazil, and Mary Stark with us. So glad to have you guys. F3 is going to join us in a couple of minutes to talk about this latest federal investigation into CDE, Assembly Bill 1955, the Safety Act, and FERPA violations. We're going to hear from F3 about what this could mean for your school district. First, a couple of headlines for you. EdSource reporting this morning, this story about the Department of Education. Department of Education has spent nearly $38 million paying laid-off employees at the Office of Civil Rights. And in the process now, we're learning that the Office of Civil Rights has dismissed 90% of the roughly 9,000 civil rights complaints it has received. In this continuing effort to dismantle the Department of Education, the Trump administration has closed 7 of 12 regional offices, including the English Language Acquisition Office. That office was in charge of serving immigrant students attaining their English language fluency. If you want to read more about that, you can do so in EdSource today. Also, Edgar, it is worth mentioning because this is something that's been making headlines really over the last 2 weeks, and we should acknowledge it. Because it does impact the entire public education system. Thousands of educators could hit the picket line over collective bargaining issues. And this is including teachers in some of the largest school districts in the state: Los Angeles, San Diego, San Francisco, Sacramento. It is a wide effort, Edgar. And so our education leaders, among all of the things they're trying to do, have yet this challenge in front of them as well.
Yeah, we may have to dig in even on this. I know we've talked negotiations. We always ask it to our friends and at school services when they come on about what some of those trends are. But yeah, this part of this We Can't Wait campaign, the 32, 33, I think they may have added a district where there's really trying to, our friends at CTA, are trying to coordinate some of their bargaining efforts across the state. Obviously, we're seeing some of this play out in some of the districts that you noted, Naj. And I'll say what I've said a couple times to the press. I was talking to Politico again. I was on an EdSource panel last week, and this was a big topic of discussion that, I think all of us that are folks here that are watching us, our leaders, I think everybody wants to compensate our educators the best they can, right? Like our classified employees, our certificated employees are the heart of our schools, right? We don't have schools without those talented educators. With that said, one of the pieces that, what's my least favorite number in the state budget every year? I say, it's that per ADA number, right? Because it doesn't tell the story. It doesn't tell the story about declining enrollment. It doesn't tell the story about the variance in funding from one district to another because of their different metrics and whatnot, right? It doesn't always tell that whole story, but I think that is some of the pieces that sometimes get at the forefront. Like, how can we not have enough money when the state keeps saying we have record investment, but the individual district situation is quite often very different, right? So I think us trying to navigate that, us trying to support our members, while also thinking about, here's one of the pieces that I've said a couple times that I'm a little worried about. I know one of the things that we completely agree with CTA as well is that we are all going to be hand in hand to re-up Prop 55, Prop 30. This is the initiative to extend some of the education funding that voters voted on some years ago. It's set to expire in 2030. There's going to be a couple efforts, maybe this year, maybe in 28, to extend that, right? I worry a little bit about us going back to the voters on saying we need an extension if there's all kinds of labor discord. Maybe the calculus is different. And I think CTA would argue that, you have to highlight that we need more funding, that's one of the pieces we're going to use to organize. With this, we're going to talk some of the political environment today on some of this other issues. I worry that strikes, folks, our management and labor not getting along. Is that the message we want to show to your electorate? Is that going to be what they see as motivation to continue to support education funding? So that is one of my concerns. I've stated it publicly. Hopefully that we are, these districts at hand are able to come to a quick resolution here. We're going to try to do what we can in partnership with some of other organizations and to provide resources to our folks. But yeah, I think this is just the beginning. This is going to be a trend line here this year on what's happening at the bargaining table.
Yeah, and I'm reading Helio Brasil's comment here. The escalating special education funding is daily bringing many to the brink.
That is one of the big.
Yeah, that one. And then I see Rusty Gordon, who you and I got to see over at our Every Child Count symposium. He says funding by enrollment versus attendance would help stabilize budgets over time. So, I mean, there's so many aspects to this, Edgar, and so much happening here in the state right now. We're hearing, these strikes could happen tomorrow. These strikes could happen next week. I mean, there's just so much out there.
I think to Rusty's comment, I do think that there's going to be some more conversations about enrollment-based funding, whether, I think we always use caution when we talk about this issue, that it would really take more investment. That I think everybody thinks about it. If my district's at 80% attendance and I was based on, if they funded us at enrollment, that would be a 20% increase. Well, yes, ideally that's how it would work. Unfortunately, we're working with a zero-sum pot, right? If they use monies to distribute somewhere, they're gonna have to take it from somewhere else. Right. So it really needs more funding. Now there's some innovative ideas, talking to some of the state leadership about, well, can you phase this in as new monies come in? So I do think that it's a conversation that seems to be an appetite for this, maybe more so than there has been in the past. So we'll see.
Yeah, we'll absolutely monitor this. Last week, U.S. Department of Education found that the California Department of Education is continuing to violate the Federal Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, FERPA. That's our conversation today, because the federal law giving parents the right to access their child's education records conflicts with what we have here in the state of California. You'll remember there was a law that was signed last year, Assembly Bill 1955, known as the Safety Act, which prohibits school districts from requiring employees to disclose a student's gender identity or sexual orientation to parents without the student's consent. So now, what is the impact on schools here in the state of California? Let's bring in our guest. Jackie Litra is from the law firm F3, Fagan, Friedman, Full Frost, our good friends over at F3. Jackie back with us. Jackie, thanks so much for joining us today and giving us a little background on this topic. Now, this investigation began in March following the implementation of AB 1955. Can you just give us a few details on why the federal government says California is violating the law?
Honestly, no. I can't really give you a lot of details as to how they came to that conclusion. They're just not providing us a lot of supporting information for that conclusion. So we don't really know how they got there. They aren't giving us factual findings that we can then applying those to the law, giving us that analysis. So we don't have a ton of information as to how they got there. It just includes some conclusory statements. There's a few examples that they claim are violations in their press release, but we don't really have a lot of backup information that we can use.
Jackie, thank you for helping us out again. Thank you to your firm, as always, to try to make sense of these complicated issues, even when we don't know all the answers, right? Because I know, and I appreciate you. I appreciate the directness, as in this case, that sometimes we just don't know, right? So, I mean, just to reset, this goal of 1955, which I know there was a lot of fanfare. We had folk on this show talking about it. It was the focus of a lot of legislative attention. LGBTQ community, there was a lot of, on the other side, there was some organizing against it, right? Like this when we had board resolutions. At the end of the day, it was a law that was put into place. And I'll say, full transparency, ACSA supported it very much so. We were part of the broader coalition that thought that this was in the best interest of students and also supported the work that our members did. With all that being said, I know here now we have yet another example where we have a state law. And now, we have the federal government saying, California, what you're doing isn't legal or isn't, it's not what you're supposed to be doing. What I think confuses then the field is we have a state law on the books. We hear through press releases, through articles that, that this is no longer in place, yet the state hasn't directed school districts to do anything different than what we've been doing or what our folks been doing. So long-winded way of asking, what should the field do in this situation, given that they see, because oftentimes they're now getting inquiries from their families. In some cases, some of the groups probably that didn't want to see this law go into place to begin with are pointing to this like, look, the federal government invalidated this school district. Why are you continuing to do this? So how do you help the folks you're working with kind of navigate, whether it be this situation, we know this is not unique. There's been a lot of cases where it's now at face value, maybe the state law is contradicting what the federal law, what the federal government is saying.
So FERPA requires the disclosure of student records upon request. AB 1955 prohibits districts from requiring the disclosure of information about sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression without the student's consent. So in many ways, they aren't in conflict on the face. If you're receiving a records request, then school districts are going to respond to the records request compliant with the law. And it's important to note that AB 1955 prohibits requiring that disclosure other than as required by law. So it is built into AB 1955 that districts are still complying with FERPA. It's not that they're not allowed to comply with FERPA or that they're prohibited from requiring compliance with federal law. So I think that is important distinction. But I think a lot of the ways that districts are navigating things, and it depends, different districts do things differently. They are all trying to do what they can to best serve students and parents in their community. How they accomplish that is often dependent on the district and what those priorities are, because a lot of what this kind of boils down to at the federal level is the state prioritizing student rights and the federal government prioritizing parents' right to information. However, they're not denying that information. So I think what a lot of districts that do this stuff well is helping to support students in sharing information with their parents or with their caregivers so that they can support those students in feeling comfortable and going back to kind of making sure they feel comfortable. Like, for example, if a student, is sexually assaulted and they report that at school, but they don't want to tell their parents, then we try to work with students to make sure that they feel comfortable so that they can get that support at home, work with parents to provide that support. It's not just about, gender identity related issues, but schools are doing this all the time. They're supporting students, they're supporting parents and how to show up for their kids and how to respond to information that kids are disclosing that they're afraid to disclose. So I think it's all kind of part of that process. And this just is a very narrow focus on one aspect of what that looks like for students.
Jackie, I'll follow up just because I know I saw a question in the chat, and Crystal asked what took me like 100 words to ask in 3 words. So the bottom line here from what you said is, what should the field do now? It sounds like right now, from a legal standpoint, there's really no reason for them to do anything differently than what they were doing before this piece, right, from the federal government.
Right. There's nothing that says that the law is invalid or violates FERPA. So California's law hasn't been invalidated. And so whereas federal law doesn't require a proactive disclosure of information without a request, and AB 1955 prohibits schools from requiring disclosure. So it's very easy to not get into that space. We don't require that disclosure at schools. We're not mandating that disclosures be made that would violate AB 1955. And when we receive records requests, we're still responding in compliance with the law. We can comply with both of these laws. So
got it.
That should be that would be the best way to go about it, is to avoid going against one or the other, because in this situation there is a lot of ability here to just comply with both.
Jackie Leitra from F3 Law joining us here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. Jackie, in your responses, you said a couple of really interesting things, so I want to bring these back up. You talked about how the law hasn't been invalidated here. That is important, and that districts are doing things differently while the state is prioritizing students. The federal government seems to be prioritizing parents. What's the anecdotal data, the response you're getting from districts, from parents? What are they hearing? What are they seeing? What are they feeling that F3 is just kind of hearing and maybe giving some advice based on that?
Well, so I think it depends on, it kind of comes to this different sides of that same argument, or understanding different positions, and where, some parents are saying it kind of goes back to anything, going farther back, deeper, broader than, 1955, but looking at parents saying this is about my kid. How come you didn't tell me this? And that happens with many, many types of information. I mean, there are so many things that happen throughout our children's days at school that aren't shared with us, that we aren't told about, that discussion we don't have. Like, they don't say, this is what your child did every minute of the day. And so there is a lot of that happens as well that isn't being shared on the regular. But that is a common issue that comes up, is parents saying, why wasn't this information shared with me sooner? Why wasn't I told about this so I could support my student? So I think a big part of that is figuring out how we're going to share information, how we're going to make sure that they have the information, that we can work with both our parents and our students so that students feel safe and comfortable, and that parents continue to feel like they're a partner in the educational process.
Jackie, you did a good job of answering about what this means for districts right now, and what they should and shouldn't do just to remain in compliance. I think where sometimes, especially when so much of this is being done through headlines, through press releases, right, I think folks get worried about this whole notion of compliance. But generally speaking, whether it be in this case or some of these issues that you've seen, when the federal government's putting this out, they're directing it to the state. What's the responsibility of individual districts? So in this case, let's say, let's play this out, that, it was found invalidated, right? Like, what would we see as the response first? Would there have to be something from the state? Like, what are the things that individual district leaders should be looking out for then?
Well, so if the law was invalidated, or that there were certain things that were limitations or guidance as to how we comply with the law because the law remains in effect, then we would be looking for that guidance to come from CDE as to how we're going to comply with the law. I mean, and they do have resources out about how to comply with FERPA and how to comply with AB 1955, and they've included those in letters that they have posted and shared with us in their response to the federal government, that those are available for everyone. But so what we'd be looking for is for some sort of limitations or guidance as to how this law applies. And some of the things that we can see in the press release about how does that information come out? Like, how are we sharing that information? Is there information that's being intentionally withheld or redacted from documents that could be problematic in response to a FERPA request?
Jackie, I want to go back. One last question for you. I want to go back to what you initially said about usually there's evidence, usually there's papers, usually there's something substantive that comes from these investigations that can be used as an example. My question was going to be, do you anticipate pushback from CDE, from school districts, whatnot? But I have to assume that you can't push back on something where you don't actually have any details to push back on. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that there will be pushback at this point. I think what we saw in the press release is that they are demands that are being put to CDE, many of which, in my estimation, seem like things that CDE would say we're already doing those things. We've never said that we weren't going to do those things, and we've never advised districts against doing those things. But if CDE doesn't do some of those things or doesn't agree to go along with that, then they're going to try to take away the funding. That's where the pushback and the state and federal government kind of come to blows, so to speak, over this issue, is that's where they're going to eventually litigate out the funding issue. At this point, there's really there's no teeth to the findings until they try to take something away from the state, until there's a punishment that's being levied against CDE. And so that's where that would come, and that's where we would see the litigation of that. And I would anticipate that the state would litigate any, attempts to withhold any funding.
Federal funding. Got it. Jackie Leitra, partner at Fagan Friedman Full Frost, our friends over at F3. Jackie, thanks so much for joining us and bringing some clarity to this situation. We look forward to having you next time.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Edgar, I do want to point out, because I do this every single time that I see somebody new, or at least somebody's name that I didn't expect, pop up on the chat. Dr. LaQuisha Wilkins is watching today from North Carolina. So Dr. Wilkins, please put in the chat where in North Carolina you are watching from, because we'd like to, one of these days, Edgar, I think that
you want a map, huh?
A map of all of the places outside of California where people watch this show from, because when we were over at Every Child Counts, Gail Olson is always watching the show, but she's always watching the show from her other home in Cabo. Yes. So when I saw her, I was very happy to see her, but she almost looked at me like, I haven't seen you not on this format here in like 5 years. I didn't really even know that you exist.
That you're a real person.
That I'm a real person. I mean, that you can debate that, but anyway, Dr. Wilkins, let us know where you.
I'm always impressed by your ability to remember every single new person on that chat. So it's definitely one of your skills there.
I don't have very many talents, Edgar, but I'll add that. I'll add that to the list. Folks, if you like what you've seen here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, we invite you to become part of the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break family. You can do that on YouTube, Facebook, or LinkedIn. If you subscribe to us on YouTube, you will get instant alerts when we're about to come on the air with breaking news and reminders about our regularly scheduled Wednesday show. You, of course, have to keep your notifications on for that. And if you have great stories happening in your school community, we want to tell those stories too. Go ahead and send your photos, your news releases, your talking points to our EdCal editor, Michelle Carl, at mcarl@axa.org. Edgar, good to be back in the seat today. Looking forward to our next edition. Hopefully we'll be able to have some news as far as collective bargaining, because I suspect that this is going to be a topic that we will have a lot to talk about.
Absolutely.
These next few episodes. Folks, thanks so much for joining us here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. Remember, we are live and interactive Wednesdays here on ACSA Facebook, ACSA YouTube, and ACSA LinkedIn. Have a great rest of the day and rest of the week, and we'll see you next time.